My first career coming out of college, I worked in group homes with adjudicated youth. And then for 10 years did family preservation work as a family counsel. So I did direct service with children and families during really difficult periods when potentially the children were going to be placed or they were placed, and dealt with a lot of different, pretty much the spectrum of issues that can occur within families. And after that, I had reached a point where I needed to have a little bit better impact. So I transitioned into a career of running nonprofits that benefit children and families as an executive director. And I attempted to work with some other people in our community to create a family resource center in our hometown here, and that was not successful. And then I did some other things before I was hired to be the executive director for the Dad's Resource Center. And now, on my behalf, that was kind of the culmination of my work career and everything I had done in my life to that point. But also, I had been an only child who'd been born to a single mother, and to this day couldn't tell you who my father was. And so my life perspective is one where I was impacted greatly and significantly by not having a father. I learned a lot of lessons the hard way, had to struggle, harder than I otherwise might have, because I didn't have that fatherhood presence. It took me a while to get going, get my footing, to get married, to have children. Everything just was on a longer timetable. And so I knew, even though I've been somewhat successful in life, it was harder than it needed to be, or could have been, or might have been had I had a father. And so this was the culmination in terms of my work and my sense of through what I do in my own time, as well as through my work. I want to make the world a better place. I want to help people, right? This has always been my center point in life and what I do. So when Dr. Joel Myers, the founder and chair of the Dad's Resource Center, they were hiring, and he and the board brought me on board. It was a culmination. It was sort of like it was meant to be in that position. And I worked with my board to be able to create what the Dad's Resource Center and then bring it to life. I wear a lot of hats administratively, the functions of running a nonprofit, making sure keeping track of our financials and all the different things you have to do with insurance and those types of things. So I'm wearing that hat, the administrative hat. I work with fathers because of my past. It's not counseling, it's best practices and mentoring and coaching, right? That's what you do with men by and large. And I think some of the things we're talking about down the road in terms of what can be done, we need to look from those spectrums when we're dealing with men versus the traditional thoughts and processes of counseling, because men just are different, right? And to be able to help them, work with them on that type of level.
Your experience makes you one of the perfect people to speak to, but in addition to your experiences, what observations have you made in working with men that make you aware of the need for greater father-family involvement?
We live in a different time, right? The traditional mother-father roles that had always existed have been turned upside down, obviously, because of the influx of women into the workforce. And it's taken time for things to adapt and to change. So those maternal, at the core, right, they're still there, right? But the roles of mothers and fathers kind of are combined and mixed up. More and more men embrace doing the routine daily aspects of taking care of their children, giving them baths, giving them showers, taking them to doctor's appointments, those types of things, as well as being a little bit more of a nurturer, just from that standpoint too. That's done from practical standpoints and just the changes in the world that we live in today. But it's also a practical thing for women. And I say this often. The best thing that you can do for a mother is to support and reinforce fatherhood, because parenting is a two-person job, right? Even practically speaking, if you think about it, there's 24 hours in a day. That's two 12-hour shifts. There's just too much when both of you are working and you both are taking care of other practical realities and your needs and the interests that you have as human beings. So there's much more at this point in time of a partnership involved versus the standard traditional roles of parenthood. And that's what children need in this day and age also, because the world's just so much more complex with social media and technology and those types of things. The world is more challenging and changing in terms of the job market and those types of things. So children need both parents to be effective, actively involved in their upbringing, to have the best chance of being successful in life. There are those specific sort of gender-related things that the one thing I always say, mothers and fathers do give some different things that the other ones can't give. So the girls, when it comes to school, I'm usually the one who leans on them a little bit more, and they do things to make dad happy, in terms of academically. That's kind of the more traditional male versus female roles. At the same time, there's certainly things that mom gives to the girls that I could never give to them as a woman. So all those components need to be in place in order for children to be successful. Now, what we're running into more and more in this day and age is that you have a lot of single parent families or children who are born not into a marriage. And most times, and this is being fair-minded about it, mom and dad work things out reasonably, right? No one needs to be involved. They work things out on their own. Sometimes, with a little bit of help and a little bit of immediate assistance, they can figure things out and muddle through as best they can. But there are a lot of situations and a lot of dynamics at play in terms of whether the mother or the father are problematic, more significantly problematic than the other person. But we have much more situations in this day and age that you have single parents where one of the parents, almost always the father, is not actively involved in the upbringing of their children.
What efforts have you made personally and on behalf of the Dad's Resource Center to advance the goals of the campaign?
It has to be said, and it can't be said often enough. Like, all of this exists and has occurred because of Dr. Rufus Sylvester Lynch. He's the architect, he's the mastermind, he's the orchestrator. My role, honestly, I said this countless times, has been to be Robin to his Batman, right? And he is Batman. I am Batman. I am Rufus, right? And so just on that human level, okay, I'm the guy who, I'm a confident, and he talks to everyone. He's open to everyone. But he kind of leans on me sometimes to vent about some things or whatever it may be. And he also trusts me to put me at the head of important things that he's trying to lay out to get done. So my first and foremost, on behalf, and just as a side note, for the Dad's Resource Center, I'm in service of Dr. Joel N. Myers, right? It's an extraordinarily high level of leadership when you can be the second to great men, right? And I've gotten a lot of fulfillment out of that over the last 5, 6, 7 years working with Joel and with Dr. Lynch. So that's the personal benefit or the pleasure or the joy that I've gotten out of doing the work that we've done to this part. Now, functionally, I've had a number of different roles because, as we all know, if you've worked with Dr. Lynch over the last 5 years, things change, things evolve. So I've had different titles, but I did a lot of things working with the legislature with Dr. Lynch. As he may have said in his interview, as a lot of people know, he had been the first Speaker of the House. He had been the first he was the chief of staff for the first Black Speaker of the House, Urbs. He had been a chief of staff for a lieutenant governor. He had been chief of staff, something along those lines, for the state Supreme Court. So, like, he's a doctor in social work, and he's a nationally renowned social worker, but at the same time, his first career was in politics. And he walks into the Capitol building, people know who he is. He calls up the speaker, right? Their people are like, we're booking you for an hour. He comes in, sits down with the speaker. They talk for 55 minutes, and the speaker looks at him and says, what do you need, right? So in the House, he really, he had the connections and the ability to work at the level with the House to be able to, that was the influence that he brought helped get us through the House with the bill. He had some allies and friends in the Senate, but he didn't have the connections that we brought with the Dad's Resource Center was some of the leadership within the Senate. And so that's the most instrumental component to ultimately having the bill passed that the Dad's Resource Center played functionally is that we were able to bring some support in the Senate that got it over the finish line to be able to get passed out of the General Assembly. But along with that, it isn't like that easy or that concrete over 5 years to get a bill passed. There's a lot of meetings, a lot of things that you meet, and then nothing comes from it, right? I mean, like we got to work every possible avenue, the executive branch too. So there's a lot of different things that I led the effort in at the behest of Dr. Lynch, was his wingman, for the lack of a better way of saying it, going into and doing some of these things and getting the bill passed. So that's my role and what I brought to the table for Dr. Lynch.
Please give me some examples of the heavy lifting that you had to do as both Joel Myers and Rufus Lynch's Robin to their Batman.
But specific to the campaign, Dr. Lynch would task me with things like creating the databases for the legislators. So we have 50 senators in the state of Pennsylvania. I believe it's like 252 representatives. Don't hold me to that. But I would create the lists of them, their mailing addresses, social media things, and those types of things for the various times that we sent information out to them. There were a number of different working groups over the years that I would chair or run, or the centralized networks. And so I was running monthly meetings very often for different steps and components along the way, and being a leader in that regard for Dr. Lynch. So those are two examples of kind of the administrative. I guess that one of the terms he gave me was a general administrator or master. I forget what it was, but it's central administrator. That was one of my terms. I was central administrator for the campaign during the bulk of the campaign. And those are the types of things as the central administrator that I was responsible for.
And did you reach out to some state representatives, senators, or other officials yourself?
Yeah, absolutely. I did. We have, of course, our local ones, but targets of opportunity. If I had an in or some sort of connection that I could go speak to someone about it, I did. Trying to build that core group of legislators who would be able to support what we were doing. Yes.
Can you give examples of individuals to whom you reached out to? And if not individuals, the types of roles that they played and who you were interacting with on a personal level? So
in order to get a bill passed, right, it's introduced and then it's placed into a committee. It has to be brought up for consideration through the committee to begin with. You hear people say bills die in committee. A lot of them just die in committee. In order to have the bill advance, the committee chair, the leadership within the committee itself has to agree that they're going to want to forward this bill. So one of the things you need to do in looking to get a bill passed is know where the bill is going in the committee, and find an avenue to be able to connect with the people within that committee. And it isn't just the elected officials. There are executive directors who work for the chair of the committees that are the ones who really do the meat of the work for the committee. So you have to go through the chair or identify the chair and the executive committee or the executive director of those specific committees. That's one of those areas that you want to target and work at when you're looking to get a bill passed. That's something that I did my part. Dr. Lynch had some of those connections, but then I also filled in some of those gaps again on the Senate side. And then ultimately, you need the leaders. If it does get brought up for consideration in committee, brought up for a vote, and passed out of a committee, then the leaders need to agree to be able to bring it up for a full vote. And so connecting with those folks to be able to have it come up with a full vote. At the same time, you want to talk to as many of the other, or connect with and have all your allies and everyone. And the other thing is help working with other people to be able to go to their elected officials, because it means more when you're an actual constituent to talk to elected officials. So that's part of what I did also, is helping to create the content and organize and help people to be able to reach out to their specific general elected officials. But You got to get up and then have all those people in place who you're educating them on and asking, we would like for you to support this because of this and that.
What type of response did you get with the key movers and people of influence when you spoke to them and discussed the importance of greater father-family involvement?
Well, I think it's like pretty much anything with elected officials, particularly legislators. They have a lot of people coming to them with a lot of interests that they think are the most important things in the world, right? And then also as politicians, right, they have to keep space on things, right? And not commit or not say anything that might be off-putting, right? So most people have a poker face, right? Or most people, and they're polite, they're respectful, and purposefully they're sometimes hard to read. Some people 100% on board, right? Or they're on board, right? But other people, that's the response that you get from them. I would say this though, definitively, because when it was all said and done, and I'll share this with you. This is another little fun story, I guess. When the bill was being brought up to be passed out of the House, because of his status as the former chief of staff for the first Black Speaker of the House, Irvis, the Speaker of the House set up, it happened to be, he set it up so the vote for the bill was the day of the anniversary when Speaker Irvis was first made Speaker of the House. What went along with that was that there were these celebrations throughout the building. So Dr. Lynch got to come down and get invited to these celebrations, all this other stuff. But also, the speaker invited Dr. Lynch to be his guest in the box on the floor of the House, as well as his guests. Rufus graciously, of course, had his wife and myself join him. And so it was Rufus, me, and his wife on the floor of the House when the speaker started talking about Irvis, this and that, and then brought up Dr. Lynch. And then he said, everyone give Dr. Lynch a hand. Everyone stood up and applauded, right? To this day, I still have goosebumps. That was one of the best moments of my life. It was just really neat. And then they put the bill up for a vote, unanimous. There was actually one no vote at one point, and I'm like, a no vote? And then they changed it. I think once they saw everyone else was voting for it, I don't know what it was, but every member of the House voted for it. And that was just a really incredible moment. Now, the Senate was much less celebratory in nature. It had drug out a little bit. Like the House passed it going into the summer. It went into the Senate. The Senate put it in the committee, and it got voted out of committee very quickly. But then it was right at the end of the summer, the spring session going into the summer, and they weren't passing anything that was not budget related. We weren't budget related. So we didn't make it through then. There were only maybe 10, 12 more scheduled sessions through the end of the session. And so we had a couple months till they started back up in September. And we were anxious. We thought, oh, okay, I'm sure they'll get it up there. But they had like 3 sessions, 6 maybe in September, and it didn't come up. Now, at this point, we're getting a little nervous, Our folks there, again, being responsible, right? They weren't irresponsible. They didn't promise anything, right? But they just kind of had a sense of calm. We're like, okay, we're going to be okay. But it got down to the last week that they actually were able to vote anything out of the session, because once the election occurs, they can no longer do anything else, right? And then everything clocks and everything has to be brought back up, right? So, but ultimately we got the notification that they were going to pass it or bring it up for consideration. It was on the agenda on like 8:00 at night on the last day they could possibly pass anything out. And this time we didn't get invited to the floor, but Dr. Lynch and I were up in the balcony, and it was very unceremonial. Right? They did this, that. So bad. But once again, and to the point, I know I'm taking a long round through this, unanimous. So when you ask what the response was, whatever anyone said at any given time while we were talking to them and muddling through to try to be able to get it passed, end of the day, there is unanimous recognition within the General Assembly of Pennsylvania, Democrat, Republican, rural, urban, conservative, not conservative, religious, like what all the differences that we have, every single one of them said, you know what? There's some problems here. These people have shown that they get it and that they have a good plan to try to help us deal with this. We're going to give them the opportunity to take another step toward being able to do what needs to be done to the benefit of the children of Pennsylvania by increasing father-family involvement. So to answer your question, taking a long road to be able to get there, that's the answer.
Is just passing the law enough? What more needs to be done?
So where we're at right now is kind of a dual step forward of this process. The first step was Dr. Lynch creating this concept, building it up, and putting it into play. The second step was the actual creation of the campaign, recruiting all the many people, cohorts that you and I have worked with over the last half decade plus, everyone participating in a very meaningful way in their own way, right? It's taken a lot of people to be able to help get us here. But that was the second step, was building up the campaign and putting the pieces in place outside, like the report he did in 2017 of all the different areas of government and how fatherhood is being affected by it, those types of things. The third step was the activity involved in being able to get the bill itself passed. Now, it's important to note that the first iteration, and I don't know if I'm saying that correctly, but the first version of the bill was to create a fatherhood commission. Okay, that's what we put out initially. Now, people talk about legislators and this and that and this and that, and we weren't happy with it at the time. But they changed it to create the Advisory Committee on Greater Father Involvement for Pennsylvania, right? That's what they did, an advisory committee. And in looking back on it, that was very wise on their part. Not just to get something passed from us, but being able to move forward more effectively. Because what they also did was have this advisory committee placed in what is referred to as the Joint State Government Commission. Now, most people aren't familiar with that. I wasn't until this process. But what the JSGC does is do the research for the General Assembly. And so they do what they're doing for us regularly. And they are completely nonpartisan. Like there's a firewall between them and the legislators. But the legislators say, we need you to look into these things, give us information on these things, and then make recommendations to us on how to address these things. That's what they do. So in their wisdom, right, they put this temporary advisory committee, the bill created this temporary advisory committee that would work in conjunction with the Joint State Government Committee. I cannot emphasize enough how wise that is, because number one, right, we couldn't do on the outside as good a job coming up with recommendations, right, is what we're going to be able to do working with the Joint State Committee, the Government Committee. I mean, again, these are like really smart people who do this regularly, have done some things that kind of are related to this, right? Like, so the product that we're going to put forward from the recommendations that come from the committee is going to be infinitely better than what us as outsiders would have been able to do on our own. That's number one. Number two, if it was a bunch of people on the outside trying to make these recommendations to the General Assembly for these different things, this is all nice, whatever, right? But if it's coming from the conjointly and through the Joint State Government Committee, they're going to be like, okay, we know these people, right? They're going to take these things more seriously, give them more consideration, right? So they benefited us moving forward in our future steps by having us work through the Joint State Government Committee to come up with our recommendations, right? So there's a lot of wisdom in then setting that up. So at this point, the committee is currently doing its work to do the research and study the issue and show where the issues exist, and then what are the recommendations. one of which almost assuredly is going to be to create a standing fatherhood commission, right? Everyone knows that. That's actually in the bill. That's one of the things that they are to look at, consider, and to recommend one way or the other. But at the same time that we're doing, at the same time that the people in the committee are doing that, Dr. Lynch is out there working on what is referred to as the Commonwealth Citizens Council. He's building from the structure of our statewide fatherhood coalition that was used to be able to get the bill passed to create a group that will support the work of the committee. So not only will you have the recommendations documented in a report by the Joint State Commission and Committee and put forward to the legislature, which is going to be taken seriously, you're going to have this outside entity of citizens who are going to go to their elected officials and say, we want you to support this, which is going to make it 2 times more likely that the recommendations coming from the committee are going to be adapted. And this is, again, credit to our champions within the General Assembly who helped us to get it passed, and also to Dr. Lynch, because he didn't just say bills passed, have a cigar. He said, we're going to have a steak dinner. We still haven't had that steak dinner. He didn't make good on that. But it's because we're not done, right? He's not having his steak dinner and smoking a cigar. He's building up the commission or the group that's going to help support us to get the recommendations passed. But then it's going to become steps 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. We're going to have to work to get those individual items implemented, whether it's through legislation, whether it's through the executive branch doing some things the way that they do their things, but even more so, the courts, which are a behemoth, right? It's a huge silo with hundreds of silos within those silos, right? So there's just so much more work that needs to get done that we're in this important critical phase that probably very few, if anyone, any other states in the country have been able to get to that point, as well as there's language in there, and I don't have it on me. I should have had that ready for when we talk. But there's language that explicitly says that the position of the state of Pennsylvania is that we need to do more to keep fathers from being disadvantaged and being able to be in their lives. It's written much better than what I just related. But there's no one who's passed anything into law that says this is the position of the state of Pennsylvania. And that in and of itself is in the bill. So that sets the standard that we can build from and point at as we're moving forward, trying to get everyone on board with everything that we're going to try to be able to get done from the work of the committee.